Before the review starts, I want to make sure everyone understands that the vast majority of my video is discussing the game on PC, as that version is vastly superior to the console versions due to some undeniably lazy decisions on Techland's part when it comes to optimization for the Xbox Series consoles and PS5, as well as the increased number of bugs I've seen reported for the console versions. I will have a section dedicated to console ports, so if you are here for that, then go straight over there. However, the majority of this video still does apply to console, so without further delay, I'll let the video play. After putting in well over 90 hours into Dying Light 2 through 3 playthroughs and almost 100% in my third save, I can safely as well as confidently say it will be incredibly hard for any other game to top Dying Light 2 this year. It is already my personal game of the year, and I do not see that changing anytime soon, even with games like Horizon Forbidden West plus Elden Ring right around the corner. This is a game that manages to change up the formula of its predecessor whilst not straying away from what made Dying Light 1 as truly fantastic as it was. As someone who was a major fan of the original game, and as someone who still holds that game up as easily one of the best games made in the past decade, I do genuinely believe that Dying Light 2 improves upon the original in almost every way possible. However, that is not to say it is perfect by any means. There are tons of issues plaguing this game, and as you make it through this video, you'll begin to realize why. In terms of the combat, it isn't even a question whether it's improved upon the original or not. Compared to Dying Light 1 and pretty much every zombie title, the gameplay for Dying Light 2 is light years ahead. The difference between Dying Light 1's combat is beyond the phrase night and day. Combat in Dying Light 1, now that I have replayed it, feels incredibly clunky and outdated. The same cannot however be said for Dying Light 2. Smashing in the heads of zombies is something I don't think I will ever get bored of, as simple things like sliding then cutting out the legs of zombies to turn large groups of enemies into crawlers allows the player to feel as if they have some control over their fate in a world overrun by infected, until you meet this game's take on Volatiles. If you thought Volatiles were even somewhat haunting in Dying Light 1, you will piss yourself in fear thanks to them in Dying Light 2. I do not at all get scared in video games often, but I was downright terrified of the Volatiles in this game. They absolutely embody Black Air Force energy. If you enter GRE facilities during the day, you can bet your ass, unless you have nearly maxed out gear and have nearly maxed out your character's stamina plus health, that you will get your ass handed to you by them. And even if you do nearly max out health plus stamina, you often get your ass handed to you by them. In co-op, they are equally as horrifying to come across. This unfortunately does not exactly apply to any of the other zombies in the game, as the ones who are actually unique don't really pose any threat to you outside of the splitter. They're merely cannon fodder. I think a reason as to why many people think Dying Light 2 has a much smaller emphasis on horror is due to the RPG mechanics. Go to your settings right now, turn off enemy health bars and awakening bars. You will instantly have a far better experience in game, and it will straight away feel exactly like Dying Light 1 in terms of its horror aspects, but better. In my opinion, these should be the default settings for the game. The RPG mechanics are a nice feature as an option. As anything but an option, they simply dumb down the game. Once you turn these things off, you will quickly learn to notice that when sneaking up to enemies, they initially begin sniffing, and then as you get closer, they start making audible cues. When you have the awakening bar on, you do not notice those things. You end up only paying attention to the awakening bar. You also begin to start paying more attention to visible damage on enemies and learn to see how close they are to death without the unnecessary health bar. Human enemies in comparison to most zombie enemies will unsurprisingly often, at the very least, offer some form of a challenge, although still not anything special like the Volatiles. A major complaint I have for the game is that during the campaign, there are no really impressive enemies to come across. Everything is mainly just your standard zombie, apart from Waltz. Unlike in Dying Light 1, Dying Light 2's campaign does not share this sense of dread every time you encounter a new zombie. In fact, most of the time you encounter a new zombie, it's not even during the campaign, it's during free roam. All in all, the combat is perfectly complemented by the parkour system, and undoubtedly feels similar to the original title, whilst creating a more depth-rich system that throughout your time with the game only gets more and more dynamic without ever coming close to straying away from its fluidity, which is exactly what makes the parkour system in this game so brilliant. I have seen tons of people compare this game's parkour system to Mirror's Edge, and although I see why people are comparing the game to Mirror's Edge, I do not think it is at all a reasonable comparison. Both games handle parkour in slightly different ways. In Mirror's Edge, parkour is far more controlled by your environment. In Dying Light 2, your parkour is complemented by the environment, and this results in a system that outclasses every single other parkour system within video games without breaking a sweat. Techland has managed to achieve the best parkour system I have seen in video games, and one that never ever gets close to being boring. Its balance alongside the combat creates an overly addictive gameplay loop that will keep on bringing you back for more playthroughs in and of itself. Originally I only planned on doing at most 2 playthroughs, and now I've ended up doing 3, but will also probably end up doing multiple more, not only because of the multitude of storylines being top tier, but mainly because of how addicting the parkour is. I mean, if you're on Xbox and still have dreams about playing Spider-Man, this game is perfect for you, unless you're on a Series S, but we'll get into that later. The grappling hook is certainly my favourite thing in Dying Light 2. Pulling enemies towards you once you fully upgrade it never fails to be insanely satisfying, and swinging around the city also never fails to entertain me. Whilst making this review, I ended up spending around 5 to 10 minutes just swinging around the city like a madman. The grappling hook alone instantly makes this game a 10 out of 10. The UV light is essentially useless until you fully upgrade it, which will result in the majority of users simply never utilizing it, as most people will end up seeing it as completely useless. The paraglider is something the game, all things considered, could not survive without. It is way too useful in the central loop for anyone to not use it every couple of seconds. I am so glad Techland decided to implement the paraglider, since as anyone who has played the game can tell you, the game would be an almost miserable experience without it. At least in the central loop, that is. The versatility it provides manages to outdo the grappling hook, and when they are paired together, it provides you with fluidity on par with Doom Eternal when it comes to gameplay. The main issue I have with the game's gameplay and progression is the skill system, and this is due to the fact that so many of the skills have no place being unlockable skills. They're things that most games automatically give you upon starting the game. Parkour skills emphasize this the most, with some of them being such basic core aspects of movement in FPS games that you wonder why the hell you have to unlock them. I get there are a limited amount of things you can do in a game like this, but do you seriously have to make me unlock the ability to slide with skill points that don't exactly come to you quickly in this game? And it feels more than counterintuitive to what the story is trying to tell you, because you're constantly being told that Aiden is a pilgrim who has travelled thousands of miles and also has got enhancements from the experiments Waltz performed on him. But on the other hand, you've got a character you need to unlock the ability to aim a fucking bow. And no, I am not joking. That is an actual thing you have to unlock. Combat challenges can vary from incredibly fun. A perfect example of this is the challenge where you have to kill 20 zombies by launching them off a platform like they're baseballs, to challenges that are just plain boring, like the one where you have to simply kill 100 zombies, something that would obviously be fun if it weren't for the fact that Techland weirdly decided to remove pretty much all of your equipment and to only give you a basic weapon, which is to say the very least, very weak. Not only that, they removed most of your equipment. I get this is meant to be a challenge, and that's probably the thought process behind this, as it would be very easy to complete the 100 kills with my usual loadout. However, they can easily just increase the kills needed, and then that problem is fixed. This is something that annoys me about some of the combat challenges, and compared to the number of parkour challenges, there are a drastically lower number of these challenges to complete in the first place. When it comes to the parkour challenges, they are certainly one of the best things in this game, and I could honestly see Techland making an entirely separate game mode within Dying Light 2's main menu, where you could attempt parkour challenges outside of the main game. They're fun enough in my experience for me to want Techland to implement a way into their game to create community servers similar to CSGO Surf for the community parkour challenges, minus the surfing of course. However, that is definitely not to say there aren't issues. As much as I love the paragliding in the majority of the game, it starts to cause problems during some parkour challenges, and it's not exactly the fault of the paraglider, but rather the fault of the zones you need to fly through. You will regularly try to fly through these zones and have the game ignore the fact that you flew through it, resulting in you getting a time penalty, and this can be more than frustrating in the fully paraglider parkour challenges, because you cannot simply go back and go through those zones. You have to restart. Not only that, but in the paraglider only challenge at times you have to leave the paraglider to use a vent in order to get high enough to reach the next zone, due to what are poor design choices. Another issue I've repeatedly had during these challenges is when landing on the floor near one of the zones you quite literally have to go through, you'll randomly get the challenge failed, pop up and have to restart. Other than those 3 issues, I haven't experienced anything negative to do with the parkour challenges, and overall they have been one of the best aspects of the game without a shadow of a doubt. However, one of the things I have extremely mixed feelings about is the way Techland are handling in-game events. I love how so far they appear to be free, but I also despise how pointless they are. Why should I bother with these events when all I get is some frankly useless gear because it does not scale to your current level, meaning that there is literally no point to getting the gear from these events due to the fact you won't actually be able to use them in any viable manner. If Techland wants to make the events this way, they need to make the gear you acquire at the very least scale to your level. An alternative to that is copying what Ubisoft does, and I know that sounds bad, but the way they handle customization in their games, minus the monetization, could be well implemented here. Most items, with the exceptions of the weapons you can get from these events, would be better off as cosmetics you could apply to your clothing, similar to how Ubisoft handles the customization in Assassin's Creed. Dying Light 2 is an absolute blast that unfortunately gets hampered specifically on console by Techland's seemingly lazy development decisions. There is no reason for the current gen console versions of this game to not be able to hit 60 FPS at 1440p, and there is undoubtedly no reason for the Series S version to run at 1080p 30 FPS with no 60 FPS option. The fact the PS5 and Xbox Series X have 3 performance options would be great if they weren't hindered by the console port having poor optimization. Sure, the game runs at a stable frame rate on all the options, but I refuse to believe the consoles couldn't run this game any better, especially the Xbox Series S version, and I am correct in the fact that the console versions unfortunately got neglected during development, as a Techland employee basically admitted it on Twitter. I will admit the game still does look good on consoles, however they could certainly look better. For anyone wondering, the performance options available are resolution mode, which runs the game at 1800p 30 FPS, essentially almost 4K, quality mode, which runs the game at 1080p 30 FPS with some ray tracing turned on in regards to shadows and some ray traced lighting effects. Then finally you have performance mode, which runs the game at 1080p 60 FPS and is in my opinion the only playable version of the game on console, as frankly playing a game as fast paced as this in anything other than 60 FPS is a struggle to say the very least, causing me to tell anyone with a Series S to straight up not buy this game until they create a 60 FPS mode, due to it not having that mode and permanently being stuck to 1080p 30 FPS, something that is completely and utterly ridiculous, especially after one of the devs, as I showed earlier, basically admitted they didn't put enough time into optimizing those versions of the game because of time constraints with the game's release date. Something Techland seem to not do is adjust the world density for consoles, which if we look at a game like Horizon Forbidden West is a brilliant way to optimize games for hardware constraints, and something I hope they look into doing to improve console performance. If you are willing to play at 1080p 60 FPS and don't have an alternative, then I'd recommend the console version, but if you do have a good internet connection, I'd say to buy the game on Steam and play it through a service like GeForce Now, because you will get an undeniably far better experience without the insane amount of bugs you can find on the console version in comparison to the PC version. If we just look at the patch notes for consoles recently and then compare them to the PC version, you will notice a common trend, and that's that the console versions have annoyingly got a hell of a lot more bugs than the PC version, which I predicted weeks before the game came out when responding to someone stupidly claiming the PS5 version would be the best version of the game. Not only that, but the PC patches are mainly adding just quality of life improvements, as there aren't nearly as many bugs on that version as there are on consoles, unfortunately. That isn't however to say there are no bugs on PC, there definitely are. In the over 90 hours I have in the game, I have not come across a whole lot of bugs, and the ones I have, you'll see as I'm talking here, none of them have really been anything close to game breaking, aside from one of them causing me to have to restart the game as a renegade was stuck inside the enemy spawn location during the mission, where you choose to either save Hackett or kill him. And one other strange thing I've experienced which is close to game breaking is that sometimes the game does not seem to properly load in the world around you on occasion after fast traveling, resulting in severe FPS drops. The only way this can be fixed is by closing Dying Light 2 and then reopening it. Apart from those two things, the only bugs I have come across are mainly ones that are just funny, like a kid's head spinning around during a side quest, unkillable friendly renegades, an unkillable zombie in one of the GRE facilities, plus a random NPC floating in the fisheye, and one of the elevator doors disappearing in the VNC tower when we were inside it. A truly terrible thing in this game overall is the settings and UI. I wish I was joking, but to change what ammo type you are using with the crossbow, you need to first of all hold down the key binding for the weapon wheel and then press Q and E to move between ammo types. Not only that, but you also have to re-equip ammo after every time you die, which when playing on the hardest difficulty is not exactly uncommon. Stuff like this makes playing the game at times immensely frustrating, but when it comes to the settings, there is not an acceptable level of key binding customization, as there are tons, and I mean tons, of hardwired key bindings overlapping key bindings if you change some of the very few available key binding options. I fail to see why a game releasing in 2022 does not have full keybind customization for keyboard and mouse users. That is a basic feature seen in almost every single game, and in all honesty, the UI is fundamentally terrible outside of the skills page. The map, for some unknown reason, is semi-3D, meaning that you can only view it in 2D, but the game will place markers in-game based on the height of your character, which consistently creates floating waypoints and gets in the way of you putting a usable marker to get to. Also, in general, there's a lot of quality of life features that the game is missing for no apparent reason. Please just let me drag and drop weapons into each slot. Having to go back and forth between each point before being able to equip weapons is a pointless inconvenience. These are issues that no modern game should have, because they're ones that have been fixed years ago in almost every game I've played. Also, there are nearly no accessibility options in this game. This is a title releasing in 2022 with a series lack of fundamental and basic settings that I rarely see missing even in indie titles. And when looking at the graphics settings menu, there is clearly room for a visual showcase for the different graphics presets. This is something we see countless developers seem to simply not want to implement, even though it's a brilliantly simple quality of life feature. When it comes to how the game actually looks, this game is no joke. It is one hell of a good looking title and is a perfect example of how ray tracing can genuinely emphasize video game worlds. Specifically in semi-indoor areas and even in indoor areas, there is a clear and obvious improvement between the game when there is no ray tracing and when there is ray tracing. Indoor lighting and lighting areas under cover from buildings above truly show how great ray tracing can be. The only thing I think they could improve in terms of the ray tracing is the reflections, and even those are still very good. If you are looking for a visual showcase from early 2022, this and Horizon Forbidden West are two great games to use. The textures for the most part share the same high quality as the ray tracing does, and so do the character models. There are a few blurry textures, but they're mainly reserved for a few ropes you can swing on in the game, and not anything you'd actually care about being blurred. To be honest, the ray tracing is such a good upgrade that I flat out refuse to play the game without ray tracing, since I can easily get around 60 FPS even with ray tracing maxed out. Unlike the console versions, the PC port seems to have reasonable optimization considering how demanding the game's graphics actually are. With ray tracing maxed out and DLSS set to performance, I'm getting on average around 57 FPS at 1440p with an RTX 3070 and Ryzen 9 5900X during a level 4 chase inside a dust cloud. And for anyone wondering, I did not see a noticeable difference in performance between DLSS being set to balance and DLSS being set to performance. Only time I did notice a difference was when DLSS was set to quality, where I saw FPS drop to around 40 FPS. If we turn off DLSS, then we see a drastic drop in performance to around 17 FPS on average, which is to be expected, since the ray tracing in this game is highly demanding, which is not because it's poorly optimized. One thing that also bothers me is that Techland should have done what many other titles with ray tracing have done, and that's offer multiple levels of ray tracing in the settings. This way, lower end cards capable of ray tracing can actually turn it on. There's little to no reason to not offer these different settings, and it's yet again something that has essentially become standard, missing from Dying Light 2 settings. Outside of level 4 chases, I'm getting around 10 FPS higher on average, which is again not at all surprising. If we turn ray tracing off with everything else maxed out at 1440p, and obviously with DLSS set to performance, I'm getting on average 82 FPS during a level 4 chase at night, and with DLSS turned off with everything else identical to before, I'm getting on average 54 FPS during a level 2 chase as it was turning day. If we turn down the settings from max to the lowest ones available, then with an RTX 3070, you can expect around 94 FPS on average at the same resolution as before, and this is without DLSS, since that would be basically pointless in this scenario for me. However, if you were to use DLSS, then I saw on average 119 FPS. All in all, the optimization I'm seeing for this game is definitely good on PC, unlike the console versions. One thing I will bring up is that for some reason the frame timing seems to be all over the place apart from on the lowest settings. However, I did notice that during gameplay and it still felt great to play. If your PC does not have above 16GB of RAM, then from what you can see in my testing, you will most likely struggle to run this even at the lowest settings available. A major factor for all this could be the world density, something that has evidently been affecting the consoles. I'd love it if Techland were to implement some form of a world density slider so that the game could run better on older PCs. Now that we have all of the topics that people would consider to not be spoilerish out of the way, I want to finally talk about Easter eggs in Dying Light 2, and then finally the story / player choice. Easter eggs in this game are as good as Dying Light 1, if not better. I have over 90 hours in this game at the start of recording, and even still I haven't managed to complete all of the Easter eggs, or even find all of them. My personal favourite, as I'm sure no one who is subscribed to me is surprised by, is the Doom Easter egg, where to begin you have to collect 5 evil rubber duckies, and then create a pentagram using some wires. After that, you enter the Easter egg, which gives you access to a toy version of Link's sword from the Zelda games, and the ability to force choke human beings. There is also a love letter in tech from Techland in the Doom level as well, which is definitely, as a massive Doom fan, nice to see. There's a Cyberpunk Easter egg that permanently gives you a blueprint from Mantis Blade, a finger gun Easter egg. To get this, you need access to Developer Room, where you'll also be able to unlock a charm that allows you to add 500 durability to any weapon with the ability to equip charms, which essentially allows you to have unlimited durability on your weapons. In the dev room, you can see quite a few posters referencing their other games as well. Oh, and there was a space cock side quest. To say the very least, that side quest was strange, although I did appreciate the poster referencing Jade from Dying Light 1 and the ability to craft a frying pan that acts like Thor's hammer. Naughty Dog should absolutely be taking notes from what Techland has done here, because this is how you do a sequel. This game's story is flat out phenomenal when you take into account how many variables they had to deal with, thanks to their decision to implement real player choice into the game. Dying Light 2 does not have pseudo player choice similar to games like Horizon Zero Dawn. Almost everything you do affects the world around you. They were not lying about the heavy focus on player choice here, and I adore the way they handle it apart from in one section, that being the end of the game. Techland gives you the option to either save Lawan or to leave Lawan. These two options are not properly explained to you, resulting in a hell of a lot of players thinking that they would have saved both the city and Lawan, when in reality if you pick the save Lawan option, no matter what your previous choices were, the city will be destroyed. Obviously an ending most people will not like as much as the one where the city survives. The endings that do exist are mainly dependent on 4 factors: whether or not you spare Hakon in Old Villador, whether you give the radio tower to Frank or the Peacekeepers, whether you kill or spare Hakon later in the game, which you can only spare him if you save him earlier in the game, and if you decide to save Lawan or let her detonate the bombs at the end of the game. No matter what choices you make, you will leave the city. The player choices merely affect what happens to the city afterwards and who leaves with you when you leave. Based on your choices, either the PKs, Night Runners or Renegades will take control after you leave. Now thanks to the player choices in the game, it is possible to leave the city at the end of the game with Lawan. This is what most people consider to be the perfect ending, and to do this there are 5 key choices in the game that you need to do. Those being save Hakon in Old Villador instead of leaving him to die, giving the radio tower to Frank, sparing Hakon in the breakthrough mission, and letting Lawan detonate the missiles in X13, where if you let Hakon live, he will save her. To get back to what I was saying earlier about how almost everything you do in the game affects the main story and what happens in the game, let's talk about how a side quest can determine whether or not you get what in my opinion is the perfect ending. During a side quest where you save Ato, a PK officer, if you decide to kill him by giving him the big petals, you will not be able to save Frank later in the game, as the Peacekeepers would have killed the quote-unquote witch, who tells you to give him the small petals in order to heal him. This means that later in the game you can't save Frank no matter what, as the mission to cure him from poisoning depends on that witch. Another great detail found in the world based solely on your choices is that either the bazaar in Old Villador or the PK headquarters there will be entirely abandoned, depending on if you meet up with Sophie or go meet Ator instead, causing all the stores and side quests available through the bazaar to be terminated, and the same for the side quests plus shops in the PK headquarters, purely dependent on what choice you make during that very early stage of the campaign. Techland has created one of the best stories I have played in a video game, while simultaneously balancing it with an insane level of player choice that I haven't experienced in any other game that I've played in terms of your impact on the world around you. I think a major factor as to why so many people have been playing this game and are saying it's got a worse story than Dying Light 1 could possibly be due to their choices leading to an ending they do not like. Out of all my endings, the one where the Night Runners run the city and Lawan leaves with Aiden is easily my favourite. My most disliked one is definitely where you choose to save Lawan, since the city gets destroyed and Aiden still leaves by himself. The voice acting at times can feel flat, however it happens so few and far between that it really isn't a problem. Most of the voice acting is great and at times it is the best of the best you will experience, something I find myself impressive as there are over 4,000 lines of dialogue in this game. I don't want to go too heavy into spoilers, which is why I've only talked about key points without major spoilers. However, there are some huge twists in the story that, unless you go down very specific storyline choices, will not be heavily hinted at, due to the fact you will have entirely different missions based on your player choices. And that is another great thing that makes multiple playthroughs of this game not remotely tiring, like it is in the vast majority of AAA titles. Not only is the main campaign in my opinion easy 9 out of 10, but so are the side quests. They share the same exact quality as the main campaign does, which again is something I find incredibly impressive, because there are a hell of a lot of side quests, making the decision to not have a new game plus at launch massively baffling to me. And I am glad to see the devs on Twitter talking about them wanting to implement it, because there is no way in hell I should have to fucking mod a game at launch just to have some form of new game plus. This game features a story which, no matter your choices, will be remembered equally as long as the original game. With all things considered, this game is from a technical standpoint immensely impressive, that unfortunately can be hampered by strange decisions like the UI, no new game plus, and the console optimization. Now we have finally come to the end of what will more than likely be my longest video ever made, so please, for the love of God, do not forget to do all the things YouTubers love to pay you to do, aka check out my Discord server, follow me on Twitter, as well as like, comment and subscribe, so that I will see you all in the next video.